I've always dreamed of going to Paris, not to see the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, or any of the other typical tourist hotspots, but to actually see the Paris catacombs. I have been urban exploring in abandoned buildings and cemeteries in my hometown of New Orleans since I was 10, and even traveled to a couple of other states just to document my findings. Normally, the scariest thing I would ever see would be a homeless person or a creepy statue in a graveyard. Nothing threatening. But in 2014, when my older sister told me that she would be traveling to Europe for vacation over the summer, I begged her to tag along. I was 18 at the time, and I was desperate to escape the humdrum of everyday life, and to finally fulfill my childhood dream of exploring the catacombs beneath Paris. I had been planning it out for years. I would enter through a tunnel that I had seen YouTubers enter through online. I would bring a reel with hundreds of yards of fishing line, and attach the end of the line to the entrance. I would let out the slack, attach the reel to my backpack, and basically get lost. When I was done, I would simply reel my way back. It made perfect sense to my narrow-minded teenage self. I wanted to go to the areas of the catacombs that people hadn't seen in hundreds of years, to go where no one else had been before. That was my dream as an urban explorer, and to me, there was nothing more exciting than going to where nobody else would be. There would be no ruining the moment by bumping into a fellow explorer. So after weeks of convincing, my older sister, who was in college, agreed to take me with her. It took a lot of talking to get her to agree to bring her little brother along, but with help from my parents, she decided that she would make the best of it. First, we went to Dublin, then London, which to me was pretty boring. Then we went across the English Channel to our first stop in mainland Europe, then arrived in Paris. I tried to get her to come with me, but she promptly noped right out of it, insisting on seeing the beautiful city instead. And who could blame her? She went to go see the Eiffel Tower, and all that other good stuff. I stayed at the hotel and waited for evening, when the weather cooled off a bit. I then made my way to the entrance by myself, at first by cab, then by foot. As I made my way towards the crevice that led to the infamous Paris catacombs, I felt eager, almost energized. I stood at the entrance and gazed into the pitch-black darkness, and almost immediately crawled in. Once inside, I took the end of my fishing line and tied it to a big stone. There was no way I would get lost. I turned on my dollar store LED flashlight. Cheap, right? I let out the reel and started to make my journey. At first, I snaked my way through what seemed like dozens of rooms covered in graffiti and evidence of teenage parties that took place there. After what seemed like an hour of reading what were most likely French curse words all over the cave system and ghoulish figures spray-painted on the ancient walls, I seemed to have stumbled across what I had been looking for. At the other side of the large room I was entering, I could see a bare wall with no signs of human disturbance. Great, I thought to myself. Now the work really begins. As I drew closer, there was a shallow tunnel to my left that seemed to go on for only about 20 yards before it would come to a dead end, the pathway completely blocked by rubble. So then I looked to my right and saw a narrow tunnel leading directly away from the dusty room. It was so small that I would have to crouch just to walk through it, and somehow, no matter how much I shined my flashlight, I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The complete absence of light. This was the first time that I doubted my journey. Up until then, it all seemed like fun and games, but now the feeling of loneliness dawned on me. If I encountered trouble, there would be no one to help. But I felt drawn to complete my lifelong quest. I took a big gulp and cautiously made my way in. Within 10 feet inside, I noticed the bottom of the ancient passage had begun to fill with water. At first, I thought my waterproof shoes would do the trick. But soon I found myself crouched over, drenched, and drudging my way through the tunnel with water up to my knees. The tunnel seemed to go gradually downward, even further into the underworld beneath the city of Paris. It was too late to turn back now. I had to keep going. And after about a minute, there was a fork in the passage. One was smaller, narrowing to about 4 feet tall, and the other was bigger, I would say about 7 feet. Not too hard to guess which one I took. I heard that these catacombs originally served as a mining system in the Middle Ages. But as I made my way further, the place seemed anything but an innocent miner's workplace. After about 100 feet inward, the walls on either side widened to what seemed to be almost like a lobby, with small rooms lined on either side. I was beginning to feel very uneasy at this point. I had seemed so brave at the entrance to the teenage party paradise just over an hour earlier, but now I couldn't help but feeling watched. I didn't want to know what was in these rooms. My footsteps grew slower as they continued to kick up centuries-old dust below. I suddenly got this alarming feeling that I should leave. I took the fishing reel that I had brought with me into my hand, and I started to turn the crank. But there was no tension. After a couple of minutes of praying to God that the line would pull tight once again, the line slipped through my hand. I took my flashlight and examined it. It looked gnawed through, like a dog had chewed through it like a play toy. "Oh shit, I'm screwed," I said to myself in desperation. I heard a splash in the direction that I had entered from. At first, I thought maybe a rock had fallen into the water. I waited. I turned off my flashlight. I heard what sounded like sharp, clunky footsteps, furiously running right for me. I bolted to my left towards a network of increasingly smaller rooms. Each room I entered, I staggered over jagged items all over the floor. I have no clue how I didn't trip, especially with my flashlight still being off. But I traversed my way into room after room, the pile of objects becoming more difficult to manage each time. I then heard a heavy, unnatural breathing. I would say about 2 rooms away. I bit my tongue and begrudgingly took my flashlight out and flipped the switch. Before me stood a pile of human bones, femurs, ribs, all the stuff you learn about in school, stacked in front of me like Jenga blocks. I looked to my right, and there was a 3-foot-tall tunnel. I got on all fours and furiously crawled my way through the murky, foul-smelling water, flashlight clenched between my teeth. Whatever had stalked me through the darkness seemed to be gone. I couldn't hear a thing from behind me, but I knew that I couldn't turn back. I was going to have to find another way out. With hundreds of miles of tunnels and passageways running below Paris, I knew that this would be a near impossible task. But I was not about to turn back to face what could possibly be an unknown creature. As I made my way through the tunnel, it would open up to where I could even walk, but other times it would narrow down again, and I would have to get on all fours and crawl just to make my way through. As I descended further, I was unable to remember which way I came, and the tunnels would often fork and split, forcing me to make split-second decisions on which way to go. It was frigid now. My teeth clattered as I dragged myself through the soaking wet catacombs. My limbs felt as though they were made of lead. It's hard to believe that this was once my dream, and it had twisted into the worst nightmare I could imagine, lost underground in the world's biggest cemetery. But I dragged myself through the maze for what seemed like hours, my flashlight starting to flicker. I would turn it off for a few minutes at a time, trying to conserve the cheap, dinky battery inside, feeling my way through with my hands. I tried many times to see if I could get cell service, but of course, it was to no avail. The last time I checked it, it displayed 4:17 a.m. I had started around 9 o'clock. I decided that it was over. I plopped down in the water, sitting crisscross. I turned off the flashlight and closed my eyes. In my mind, I said goodbye to everyone I knew. all of my family members, friends, and even acquaintances. I decided to look at a picture of my family on my phone. I clicked it on and found the best picture of my parents, my sister, and myself. And I stared at it. My sister was smiling, and I found my eyes welling up with tears. It made me feel worse that she would never know what happened, that her wonderful vacation would end up being a depressing disaster. My mind went quiet, and my limbs went numb, and I accepted that this was the end, strangely fitting for an urban explorer. Just when I leaned back against the wall behind me, I heard a familiar splash from about 50 feet away. I jumped up, grabbed my flashlight, and ran away like the roadrunner from the cartoon. With no bones to trample on, I was running at what seemed like an Olympic sprinter's pace, and that's when I collided headfirst with a wall. It was a dead end. Through my throbbing headache, I could hear the dreadful pitter-patter growing louder. Finally, it seemed to stop about 10 feet away, and that horrid breathing echoed in the passage around me. It stepped closer, and hands trembling, I decided to turn on the flashlight. If I really was going to die, I was going to at least know what had finished me off. I flicked it on. What I saw before me was a disgustingly hunched, 6-foot-tall skeleton, jawbone hanging down as though it was panting. Its empty eye sockets peered down at me, and though it had no eyes, I found myself in a staring contest with it. Soon, it started convulsing. I could hear a small whimper emanating from its bones. It grew louder into a chuckle. And finally, an all-out hysterical laughter. The shriek echoing throughout the lonely catacombs. Its bones shook and rattled with every painful laugh. The sound didn't even come from its mouth. Rather, it seemed to be vibrating from the skeleton itself. It sounded almost like a demonic joker. It bent down from its already slumped position. Unnaturally long arms stretched out towards me. It then sprinted at me at full speed. I was still collapsed on the ground with a throbbing head, and I did the only thing I knew I could do. I leapt up, waited until it was a foot from me, then grabbed at its bony arm with my left hand. Flashlight dropping into the water, I immediately took my right fist and mustered as much strength as my tired body would allow and slammed it straight into the skull. I closed my eyes and heard a loud crack. I was prepared to be attacked in revenge, but silence followed. I slowly opened my eyes and picked up my flashlight. I then pointed it around. Arriving at the ground below, the skeleton had lost all life. It was now just a pile of bones in a puddle at my feet. Had I just killed a skeleton? What was it even doing alive to begin with? I stared down at my hand, which was surprisingly unharmed. What the hell? I asked myself in amazement. How did it not have a nasty gash where my aching knuckles made contact with bare bone? I decided to power walk away from the scene, in case the thing could still come back from the afterlife and approach me again. I cautiously waited until I was about 40 paces away to turn back around with the light. It was gone. There was nothing but water. Not a single rib anywhere. If anything, this scared me worse. I kept walking back the way I came. Suddenly I felt my confidence return to me, like it was when I entered the catacombs several hours earlier. Like something was urging me, telling me that I could find my way back. Deciding to attempt a miracle and retrace my steps, I conserved the flashlight as well as I could, and after a while of dragging myself through the tunnels, and after a combination of walking, limping, and crawling, I started to recognize where I was. Before I knew it, I was slithering my way back through the muddy passage into the endless rooms of bones. I turned on my flashlight to see the same pile from earlier. I made my way back through the rooms, through the hall, and back into the pitch-black tunnel with the large room. I now looked at the far side, and it felt like I won the lottery when I saw the crudely spray-painted SpongeBob on the wall. At last, civilization. I knew my flashlight would give out at any moment, but in its last moments of life, I somehow found the end of my fishing line. Of all things, it had gotten snagged on a broken wooden chair. I turned the flashlight off and felt my way back to the entrance using only my hands and the fishing line to navigate through the dark. Not gonna lie, I tripped a couple of times and walked into a couple of walls, but I wasn't about to let that stop me now. Before I knew it, I could hear and smell the fresh air. As I reached the end of my line, I looked up to see the tunnel entrance, and with my last ounce of strength, I lifted my cold, aching body through the crevice into the entrance above. As I made my way into the morning light, I winced, my ears relishing at the sound of the morning traffic and the bustle of the city. I made my way through the streets of Paris back to the hotel. I had lost my phone in the process of being pursued, but I was just happy to be alive at that point. When I finally got back to the hotel, I knocked on the door. My sister opened it. She had tears in her eyes. It looked as though she had been crying the whole night, and she instantly threw her arms around me. I told her, and everybody else for that matter, that I had gotten lost, but I never mentioned the skeleton that attacked me. Sometimes I wonder if it was even real. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. I'll never know for sure, but that's probably for the best. My urban exploration days are over, but this experience will always reside in the back of my mind. I write this now because of the memories that still haunt me. Sometimes I wake up at night screaming, having nightmares about being lost underground, or being chased through the darkness. Maybe after finally telling my story, I can finally put this whole thing to rest. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's story. So as you know, Halloween is closing in, and I would like to do a special on this channel where I read some of your true scary Halloween related stories. If you would like to contribute to this video, please send in your stories to the email you see on screen now. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit, and as always, never forget. There's always a reason.